Welcome back to Highly Respected in the New Year. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have a very special year in review episode. Yes, I know it's no longer 2023, but we really did not get to do that last week because I had to do a Nikki Haley topic, and I wanted to get on that and also answer some of our cognitively questions. So today we're going to do our grand year in review and oversee how that may impact the new year in 2024. So the things to look out for in 2024. So a lot happened in 2023. I think everyone could note that it was a deluge of news. A lot of it, I wouldn't say is very good. And it's hard to, parse and decide what to cover in this podcast because I don't want to make it a extremely long podcast because it is a holiday. It is New Year's Day. And I want to get on the important topics to cover for keep in people's minds as we go on into the new year. So deciding what is important to talk about. I think the best way to do that is two broad themes. And one is changes and developments on the right and changes and developments within the country itself. And those are the two ways to look at it. That might not include some topics or really focus on some topics that have been big news this year, such as the Israel-Palestine conflict. Very big topic. We'll discuss some of that influence on how that's changed in the right, maybe some of the influence that it's changed on America. Some may complain that I'm not talking about certain topics more than others, or I'm focusing on one topic to the detriment of others that they would prefer, but it is my podcast, so we will discuss that. So I think it will be best to discuss the changes on the right, or the big moves on the right that have been impacting it. And I think the first thing you would have to talk about is the GOP now having majority in the House and what they did with it. And I think if you look at, from the new year and what they did in 2023, I think you would conclude that they didn't really do much of anything with their majority. Most of what they did was fight over who the House Speaker would be. This started off last year in the new year in 2023 is that they fought over Kevin McCarthy being the House Speaker. He had to go through multiple votes to get to offer concessions to conservative holdouts in order to get him the House Speaker. And then when he became House Speaker, Republicans really didn't do much of anything. Despite the border crisis being arguably the biggest problem for America. Actually, I wouldn't say arguably. It is the biggest problem of America facing it right now. The House didn't really do anything about it. They focused more on the standard Tea Party shit when they were there. And focusing on Hunter Biden. So they get in and they have all these plans. They have a very thin majority, and they appear to get enough concessions from Kevin McCarthy that they can do something serious. And what do? They don't really do anything. They haven't passed any serious legislation. The House did pass a pretty decent border bill in May, but of course it had no chance of passing the Senate, so nothing they've really done has made a huge impact besides the House Speaker battles. They did remove Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker, and then there was a whole ordeal to find a new replacement, and then they found Mike Johnson, and everyone's like, this is so awesome, this is so much better. And then Mike Johnson has been largely the same as Kevin McCarthy, but not as good as a fundraiser and seemingly in less control of his caucus to get them unified. We'll see. He may turn out to be a better House Speaker, depending if they can get a deal done on border funding in exchange for Ukraine funding. That's more on the Senate side if they could do that, but if it gets approved in the House, then Johnson can say that he was a more effective legislator, a more effective leader of the GOP House caucus than his predecessor. So that still remains to be determined, but so far he seems to be about the same as Kevin McCarthy, and I think he's the one difference is that they're not raising as much money, which is a huge problem for GOP. When we talk about a lot of the electoral problems of the GOP and why they're losing elections, there's a lot of reasons. There's the issues of abortion. There's some of the fact that they're not getting out a lot of these Trump voters because Trump's no longer on the ballot. Maybe you can say that there's maybe not the best candidate choices there. maybe that there's, rather not maybe, I think one difference between the elections we were seeing in 2021 versus 2022 and 2023 is that the issue of COVID lockdowns was a huge help to Republicans, and a lot of voters turned out to cast their ballot in rejection of the insane COVID lockdowns. That's no longer there. There's a lot of those reasons, but a reason that is there's a lot of core fundamentals that the GOP is failing at, and fundraising is huge. Looking at the races in 2022 and 2023, Democrats are out fundraising them by a lot. In the Arizona Senate race between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters in 2022, Mark Kelly had like 6 times as much money and raised as much money as Blake Masters. I think it's even more. I don't want to say it's 10-1, but it was like 7-1. And that is a huge disadvantage for Republicans. And this problem is only getting worse, is that with the fundraising issues. And they're not having really, that prevents them from building the type of ground organization they need to get out the votes. They have really bad get out the vote operations. This has been a problem for years and years. This is a huge problem in 2020 with their get out the vote operations. I remember, talking with people involved in that in 2020, and they're like, that day of, they're like, our get out the vote operation shit the bed today. And I don't know if I don't think these issues are being resolved for next year. And certainly the fundraising problem is only getting worse. And so that is something to come with Mike Johnson and Kevin McCarthy. Now, you could argue that focusing on better issues or fighting for better issues may come at the expense of getting more money, and that's a worthwhile trade-off. So I would agree with that. Maybe you could say that you're not getting as much donor money because the GOP is moving in a better direction. There's a little bit of that, but at the same time, there's just not good fundraisers within the party. The party organization is horrible, and this comes at a price when elections. I mean, Democrat organization and fundraising is very strong right now, and that is helping them a lot in elections. But, that goes into one of the issues of the 2023 elections. One of the big news cycles for the GOP with that, we're switching around a little bit because we're going from something that was happening in January to something that happened in November. But that's going to be a lot of the podcast today, is that we're not going to go in chronological order. We're just going to go in order of things that I feel are appropriate. So you see this with the GOP House. They're having their issues, they're fighting over this. They're not getting really much done. Then in November, there's, fairly important elections that could be seen as a barometer for what could happen in 2024. And the GOP did not do well. They were supposed to win, they were expecting to win the state legislature in Virginia, these state Senate races. They lost. Didn't do as bad as it first looked like. There was a slight improvement from previous elections. Prior to 2021, they did increase some of their seats, but they didn't get the majority. So there was a loss. They lost the Kentucky race, gubernatorial race, which, that's a deep red state. Had a guy who is approved by both establishment and MAGA. Some people probably didn't like him very much. The black guy who ran against the popular Democratic governor, he lost. And then in Ohio, there was an abortion referendum, to ensure that abortion remains legal in Ohio, and it passed overwhelmingly at the ballot box. Also, a resolution to legalize marijuana also passed overwhelmingly at the ballot box in Ohio and a few other places. So it was not quite good results that they were seeing in these elections in 2023. Now, you could say that there's unique circumstances in all these places. You could say that Virginia is so blue that, maybe it's a little bit too much to hope for to win the state legislature. You could say that. You could say that in Kentucky, it all came down to personality, and that the fact that the current governor, Andy Beshear, is just so modern and so popular that it didn't matter who Republicans would put up against him, he would have won. You could argue that, but when it comes to Ohio, and maybe you could say that, well, the Ohio thing, these voters may vote for legal abortion, but they're going to vote for Republican. There are a number of them who are going to vote Republican in 2024, which is probably something that a lot of conservatives don't want to acknowledge, but you know, when you look at some of these when you look at some of these referendums on abortion in deep red states, it is clear that a lot of the voters who are voting to keep abortion legal, a number of them, also vote Republican on the ballot. So there is that weird dynamic going on. And maybe you could say that this is too much to read into, that there could be a completely different result. And one point you could say is that in 2021, it looked like Republicans were going to murder Democrats in 2022, and that didn't happen. Lots of events could happen between now and November that could really help the GOP and overcome the circumstances that hurt them in 2023 and 2022. But there is enough there that you can see some trends going on, which abortion is not helping the Republicans, but Republicans don't really know how to deflate the issue. You know, some of the idiots are like, let's do a national ban, a 15-week ban, which technically polls well, but to any voter, you know, they feel that abortion ban, and it clicks on their mind that they're just going to ban abortion outright. No, not even 15-week ban, total abortion ban. And a lot of the people proposing abortion ban, a 15-week abortion ban, don't really help their cause by then going into more further out proposals, more radical proposals, such as, you know, banning birth control, banning surrogacy and IVF. There's been even calls to ban genetic testing. And so these issues are not popular at all. And so it's hard for them to say, oh, we just want a 15-week ban. And then you go in their public statements and they're calling for bans on birth control and IVF and other means associated with this birth and pregnancy. So these are not very popular issues. So even having abortion as being talked about is probably not going to help Republicans. So the best strategy is just say, leave it to the states and try to focus on issues that help the GOP, such as crime, immigration, and the economy. And just say, whenever asked, it's like, it's a states' rights issue. And that's probably the best that the GOP can do. And maybe that might work as other issues come to the fore and are a bigger factor in voters' minds as they go to the ballot box in 2024. You know, maybe immigration just overtakes it, and maybe it doesn't prove as potent for Democrats to run on in 2024. So that remains to be seen. But seeing from these elections, a couple things you conclude is that, you know, GOP is shitting the bed when it comes to fundraising and organizing. Abortion is not helping them. Trump actually may help, because I think that there are a number of voters who are not turning out and not voting because Trump is not on the ballot. You know, and they thought that 2020 was going to be a bloodbath. And you could argue that Trump did very well in 2020. I mean, it's not even you can argue, is that he did far better than he was expected to in 2020. And they're just thinking that this is going to be a catastrophic election where the Democrats are going to even have a supermajority in Congress and all this stuff. And that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And even if, you know, you take the Democrat position that is like, you know, it was the fairest, freest election ever, you know, there's only 30,000 votes between Trump and victory. And that's even taking from the standpoint that it was free and fair. There was no rigging at all. And so, and even this is also even for forgetting what's going on with voting. You know, they had these mail-in ballot rules that obviously favor Democrats, and they could do massive ballot harvesting and have as many, you know, dubious votes as they want. You know, even just thinking about how media rigging, you know, there's a massive amounts of social media censorship. You know, every cable news channel is talking about how Trump is guilty of genocide for what he did on COVID. They have the death tracker. You know, they really tried to frighten people as much as possible. And look at the election results. Trump does get voters to turn out in his favor. And I think that will help GOP in 2024, even if he is convicted of, you know, in one of these trials this year. You know, it's not going to be a blowout, because there's going to be so many people to turn out to vote for him that it will negate some of these losses or some of these fears among GOP. It will help their get out the vote operations. Now for the next thing impacting the right is Trump and the primary. So there's two aspects to the Trump. One, the biggest aspect is the prosecutions against Trump. This is it is arguably probably the biggest political news story. I mean, there's so many things that are going crazy in the Biden years, everyone thought it'd be a return to normality, that, everything would calm down, that there wouldn't be as much news. It would be like pre-Trump years, which, looking at what news companies focused on in the Obama years, they would have like a whole week dedicated to Obama doing a latte salute to a Marine. There was not a lot of news material for them to go off of, or senators making comments that today that would definitely not even make front page news, would be like a month-long discussion. Because there was like just not much news going on. It seemed like a more normal, calm nation and calm world. Today, there's not that. I mean, you've got, you've got crises all over the world. You've got Ukraine, you've got Israel, you've got what's going on with the Houthis in Yemen, you've got fears over China may taking Taiwan, you've got India doing crazy stuff, against its Muslim. Well, some people may approve of what they're doing against the Muslim minority, but you have that going on. You have this insane border invasion, and you just have all these political problems and internal problems happening in America. I have these very important elections going on all over Europe, with unprecedented results of the right and nationalists winning. So there's just a lot going on in the world today. But when it comes to things that are very important and unprecedented in American history, the indictments against Trump are really something important. And I don't think that they've been given as much weight in this country because we have so many crazy things going on, and that it doesn't get as much focus as you would think. And even going back to the Trump years, news media made up stories to get, worked up about. A Trump tweet could just cause a whole week-long news cycle. Him being mean to reporters, being like, democracy is over. We can't have this. He just insulted a CNN reporter. He talked back to them. How dare you? This is Mussolini. This is dictatorship. And they would have hysteria all the time. And then when something actually big and important happens, he gets 4 indictments in 1 year. It's just like, oh, well, it's just not treated as important as you think. And maybe that's just with the news today. I think it's also with, hyper politicization that was happening under Trump is been dissipating a bit. I think more people are wanting to focus on sports or TikTok or video games or whatever, and they're not as plugged into politics as they were and news as they were in the Trump years. And you can see this with the massive layoffs that are happening in news media. A lot of these new media outlets, new online media outlets are shutting down, like BuzzFeed News completely shut down. Over the last year, CNN was laid off like hundreds and hundreds of people. Washington Post is laying off hundreds and hundreds of people. So there's big, maybe not hundreds, but hundreds of people for these outlets. So there's a real decline in news consumption, and that means that people are not as plugged in and feel as important about these political events. But the indictments are very important. And, this sort of started off, and some people were like saying, oh, he wasn't going to be indicted, this wouldn't do it. And then he got all 4 indictments that he was expected to. And he might even get a 5th indictment this year, depending on what they do in Arizona. So, because there's a case in Arizona that they're pursuing similar to the Georgia case, and officials there may charge Trump alongside these electors, alternate electors, which they've done in Michigan, they've done in Georgia, and they did in Nevada. They're looking to do this in Arizona. I think they're going to do this in Arizona sometime this year. They can't do it in Pennsylvania, can't do it in New Mexico because the alternate electors, made sure that how they signed up for this was legally sound, or 100% legally sound, that they could not be charged with anything. They may even do it in Wisconsin. So there are these issues there. They're going along with that. So this is big stuff that the state is taking the prosecution against Trump, really persecuting Trump and his core supporters. It's a big moment for the nation. We've never really done this before. I mean, there's a few presidents we may have done this, Richard Nixon for one, but we've never actually had these prosecutions for him, and we have 4. against him in 1 year. And also the prosecutions against his electors, the continuing prosecutions against the J6ers. And it's really trying to create this narrative that MAGA is an insurrectionary force. It's a threat to democracy. It tried to do a coup against the United States government in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And this is furthered along by these prosecutions and indictments against Trump. So you would think that this would be the biggest news story of the year, but I don't know if it would be the biggest news story of the year. It was really greeted with a shrug by the country. And when these indictments were first announced, liberals were terrified that there were going to be J6s all over the country. This is a big worry, I think, about them doing this, is that they really thought that this could upset the country and cause a lot of social turmoil. And none of that really happened. We had a few scattered protests throughout the country, nothing really notable to say or to see about these protests. I mean, of course, these were happening in liberal districts. It's not like there's a ton of conservatives in Clayton County, Georgia, or in New York City, or in D.C., or even in Miami, where some of these prosecutions are happening. But there was just no major protests. And so those fears of, J6 times 3 or whatever they expected never occurred. And I think that's also why they decided to pursue these prosecutions, because they were worried that maybe, liberals are deeply traumatized by J6. I don't think that this is, which is stupid to be, but I don't think I don't think they're lying by saying about they're like, this is another 9/11. They are still triggered by it. And they were very much afraid of what could happen there. And I think there was hesitation to prosecute him and charge him because of what could happen. But once they learned that, the first indictment from New York of Alvin Bragg was a test to see what would occur, what would be the nation's reaction. And just seeing as oh, well, I guess they're prosecuting him. They're just like, let's do this. Let's keep prosecuting him more. But the second crazy thing is not that there's no social turmoil, is that the indictments have helped shore up support for Trump among Republicans, which you would think that this would, maybe in some of the liberals who are trying to prosecute him, would think that there would diminish his support and hurt his support. Instead, it increased his support. His poll numbers are higher than they were when he first started running for president in November of 2022. I know these have really helped him out and secure and center support around himself. So at the same time that there's a shrug from the nation, it's also increasing support for Trump, but it's not coming at the risk of tearing at our social fabric, our violence, our riots, or anything. It's, within the normal parameters of political discourse that there's increasing support of Trump. So what are the takeaways from this important event? One is that liberals realize they can use state power against conservatives without much repercussions. And this is not just against Trump. I mean, there's also the alternate electors that I mentioned. There's also the Ricky Vaughn case against Douglas Mackey, how they're persecuting him over memes. There's been a few other cases of that. I mean, it's what's happening with the J6ers, that they can just go after these people and they don't really have to worry about it. And Trump is, the main guy on the right. He is the real leader. If there's anyone who could count as the leader of the American right and as a very popular figure for our side, it's Donald Trump. There is a type of support for him and loyalty to him and focus on him that is unprecedented in modern American history. And there's no one on the right who can compare to that, which is why he's winning the primary by a lot. And he's going to easily win this primary, contrary to what people were saying at the beginning of 2023, which I was right on. Everyone was like, you're stupid. Wait for the announcement of DeSantis. And DeSantis is just proven, as I always predicted, of how DeSantis would go in a primary. But we'll get to that in a moment. But anyway, he's the core figure. He's the charismatic figure and the leader, and they still want to vote for him, but they're not willing to go to the barricades for him. They're not willing to have a civil war or a revolution over that, which there's no moral judgment of that. I think it's just something that the right needs to accept, because if you go on Twitter all day, everyone's like, civil war is just around the corner, revolution's around the corner, whole collapse is going to happen, the system just has no legitimacy, blah, blah, blah. And then you see, okay, you all predict all this stuff happening. And there's a major event that would cause mass social unrest in other countries and other time periods. There's been several times where they've tried to prosecute popular leaders of an opposing party, and that leads to riots and other types of social turmoil. And, all these people predict, civil war or national divorce is just around the corner. Just wait for it. We really have a moment that can set it off. And then you have this case where they're prosecuting Trump and literally nothing happens. It's not even the most important news story. I mean, the Bud Light boycott, which we'll get into in a moment, was much more important to the right than the Trump indictments. In terms of things that they were more passionate about, more motivated by, especially online. I think with online and among the activists and among the hardcore consumers of conservative content and news media, the Bud Light boycott was more important to them than the Trump indictments. And I don't think we're going to have a civil war over the Bud Light. I'm going to make that prediction. I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're not going to have a civil war over Bud Light, but maybe I'll be proven wrong. And so that's just dismissing a lot of these theories that we have about this. And that's also what helps the left, is that the libtards, is that they can easily arrest and prosecute people that they perceive as political enemies. And the most that will happen is that people will sell t-shirts of Trump with a mugshot. And you can even see the type of mass social unrest that can happen with, in Spain, there was a prominent nationalist leader who was nearly assassinated, nearly killed, and that sparked off right-wing riots and protests. Whether that was the most productive thing, one can argue about that. I don't know if that would be it wouldn't be very productive here, because then they just arrest more right-wingers. Look at what happened in J6. But I think with the level of content and what all these people talk about on Twitter all fucking day and on social media, we're just around, the right is extremely dangerous, which the left wants to believe, but also people on Twitter want to believe. And you don't want to fuck with us. It's about fuck around and find out, and you'll see what happens. And then this is the type of event that could spur all these fantasies of what's going to happen to America and these wild fantasies, and just nothing happens. So you have to realize what the state of America is that hyper-politicization of the type we saw from 2017 till, I think this extended till the COVID lockdowns were lifted in early 2022. That is largely gone. There's still people are very political and very involved in this stuff, but the public reception of all these important news events that are happening throughout the world and throughout America are much less energetic, I guess is the word you could say, than they were in, say, 2018 and 2019. I mean, the amount of just stuff that would, conjure up months of outrage and mass protest during the Trump period, we're not seeing that now. Now, that could all return if Trump gets a second term. I think there's a very good chance of that. But for the time being, it's not happening. And there's benefits for that for the right. I think there's less of a push for censorship than there was during the Trump period. There's, censorship has definitely been our free speech on the internet has certainly been a lot better now than it was during the Trump period. Large part, this is due to Elon Musk, but it's just there's not as much intense demand for it among news media because they're laying off a lot of journalists, and there's not as much intense demand from the government. So that's one positive thing. And I think if you don't have the hyper-politicization among the libs who think that fascism is around the corner, that will help GOP win an election in 2024. And I think also Trump is a known quantity. I think it's hard to, turn him into the next Hitler when people remember his first term. It wasn't Hitler. So they're not going to have the type of hysteria that they were able to conjure up as they did in 2016 and 2020 because Trump is a known quantity. They know what he's going to do. And also his indictments haven't infected his support among Republicans. As I said, it did increase. And a conviction may change that. Polling does show that a number of Republicans would reconsider their vote for Trump. Now, we have to wait to cross that bridge when it occurs. Maybe they change their minds. Maybe that doesn't affect them as much. Most smart guesses say that it will affect Trump. How much That remains to be determined. So a conviction could diminish his support, but a conviction is not going to lead to the type of mass social unrest and turmoil that everyone on Twitter believes is just, the right is ready to unleash, is ready to overthrow the government, which they're not. If anything, they're just there to tweet more and post more, which, I think when we've seen some of these like large demonstrations and violent protests from the right, they've generally not gone well for the right in America. See January 6th. So I'm not saying that this is the smart thing to do. I think, J6 and anything really hurt the right, and by the type of backlash it was able to generate. So I'm not saying that, and I'm of course not arguing for this stuff. I'm just saying, compared to what everyone talks about all the time and like a lot of the popular rhetoric, this popular rhetoric online is completely out of touch with what reality is in America. That brings me to the other big development on the right is Elon Musk Twitter. And now it's X, but Elon Musk Twitter has had a tremendous impact on the right, or at least the online right, and how rhetoric develops and what now people get to talk about or want to talk about in conservative spaces. Now, there's been some very positive developments in this. I think when you see the amount of people talking about the Great Replacement and talking about black on white crime and anti-white racism, this has very much helped with Elon Twitter. And even with some of the stuff about Israel criticism, there's a way more stuff of that being allowed on the right, or people are more interacting with that than ever before thanks to Elon Twitter and the lack of censorship. So those are very good, is that they now have a lot of right-wing rhetoric, at least when you see it online, now reflects a lot of what the dissident right has been talking about for years, and people would get fired over if they discussed, and now it's common discourse for the right. And this reflects, reflects in people like Charlie Kirk, what they're talking about, with Tucker Carlson, even though he's no longer on Fox News, that's now, Tucker was doing this stuff even before Elon Twitter, but it's now been expanded thanks to Elon Twitter. But there's a few problems with this. One is that there is tons of idiotic content that now rises to the surface. And it's because there's this intense focus on content farming where everyone is just trying to get the highest engagement possible. And so people will spread lies and ridiculous conspiracy theories and this really hysterical content that they know is wrong, and they're just trying to get as much engagement as possible. And there's also a monetary factor now due to the fact that people can make money through Twitter advertisements and get revenue from that. And the more engagement they get, the more money they make. And so they now dedicate themselves to content farming. And we've seen a lot of stupidity take over the right. This started off at the beginning of the year with Damar Hamlin, with the Damar Hamlin body double theories that everyone was rolling with. And you saw major accounts that were getting like 50,000 likes on Damar Hamlin body double clone accounts stuff. And it's like totally ridiculous. We've been seeing weather machine content that's been getting tons of great, huge engagement. It started off with the earthquake in Turkey, but then there's been other weather machine stuff because there was stuff in Hawaii, the fire in Maui, where people wanted to say that, it was set up by, there was the child trafficking also involved in this great fire. They're trying to do this, or it was all about property damage or property values. Oprah Winfrey used a space laser to, one, increase her property values and to abduct the mole children or something. Like, these are stuff that gets insane amounts of engagement. And this just carried on. There was like tons of tweets saying the Ukraine war is fake. It's like, how the hell is it fake? It was like, these video clips aren't there. Once again, getting thousands and thousands of likes. And then it got even, sometimes you could say this stuff's like harmless, whatever. But this is the stuff that really engages people. And it got worse, with the UFO stuff. The UFO stuff is perfect because this has become a huge, interest among the right. And for a lot of reasons. One is that, it's relatively harmless. Like, you're not going to get canceled for talking about UFOs. And also you can exaggerate it more, or make it even more content farm friendly by saying it's not just that they're UFOs, they're demons. They're demons. They're being drawn here by the drag queen story hour, I guess. So we've got to be on the lookout for demons. And this was seen with, I mostly a fan of Tucker. I think he's done a good influence. But this interview he did with Tim Cast and Charlie Kirk at a TPUSA event, where he talked about how the UFOs are demons and there's like angels fighting. And I was just like listening to it. And Tim Cast was going and nodding their head. The whole crew was nodding their head as like acting like they're listening to Socrates or something. And you're just like sitting there and this is the most insane fucking thing I've ever heard in my life from a major commentator. Now, I don't want to say that this is all negative about Tucker, but and maybe Tucker genuinely believes this, but I think it's very concerning when you have major figures say ridiculous shit like this, and this is what's being produced by the content farm. And there's also dangerous stuff too. Well, maybe not dangerous isn't the right word, but there's also really bad, harmful stuff that comes from this. One is the desire to dox and unmask white nationalists who gather in public and do these stupid protests. Now, I've talked about these stupid protests a lot. What the Patriot Front and those guys do, it's counterproductive. They're supposed to be winning over normie conservatives and Trump supporters, and they all think that these guys are feds and what they're doing is stupid. And you would think that this would cause them to change their tactics and do something more productive to win over people. And a lot of these guys are just naturally idiots. But they choose not to do that. They keep going out in public with skull masks and like Nazi flags and stuff. And obviously this isn't winning over people. And they all think they are feds. But then there was an incident over the summer where Proud Boys, a group that is infiltrated by the federal government. This is found out at their court case in their trials over J6. They've been charged with sedition and stuff. That came out that they're riven with feds. Well, the Proud Boys in Portland decided to fight and unmask these white nationalists who showed up. I forget the group. It was like Rose City Nationalists or something like that. And they unmasked them, and the idiots on conservative media are like, we're going to track down and figure out who these guys are. And the first guy they found out was already been doxxed by Antifa. And his information is on Antifa websites. And instead of correctly assuming that, this guy's already been doxxed, he's just some random person who's not using his thinking cap. He's doing stupid stuff, but, he's not a Fed or Antifa. There instead is like, we found him on an Antifa roster because that's what Antifa websites do. Of course, when they're talking about Nazis and fascists and racists, it's actually an Antifa roster. And all these conservatives are sharing it, getting massive likes and stuff, and you're just wondering how stupid these people are. And the second is the second guy they found was some dude who was over 1,000 miles away, is Jewish, not likely to be involved in this stuff. Didn't really look like the guy either. He looked sort of like the guy. And this is just some college student over 1,000 miles away. And they found proof that's like, this guy wants to work for the government. It's like thousands, tens of thousands of people want to do that. I mean, and it's not like, random college student, we need you to go over 1,000 miles away to be in an anti-Semitic group, even though you're clearly Jewish. But I don't know how that works. But they're all like, wow, we tracked him down. This guy is totally a Fed. And all these guys are doxing some random dude. And you're like, this is like Antifa with like 60 IQ that's going on here. And it was so stupid. And like Elon Musk was promoting this stuff. And major conservatives like Benny Johnson was like, we need to dedicate ourselves to rooting out and finding these racists and exposing them and doxing them. And instead, these guys are already doxed. You're relying on Antifa, and then you're such idiots. You just say this is an Antifa roster. And some of this stuff also came out with sleuthing, is that the new way that the Republicans in the House want to win over conservatives is they just release random J6 footage. And the latest batch they had, anytime, there's some time, a lot of this footage does confirm that this wasn't a riot, it wasn't a coup. Police were letting them in. A lot of these people thought they were allowed to go in. And so it was showing that a lot of these people didn't commit crimes. I think it gives further evidence for it. It doesn't really, I don't think it really provides the smoking gun that like the feds were involved, but they try to find this. And one time they found a guy who was holding up what they appeared to be a badge. And it wasn't a badge. It was a vape pen. And the guy that they were saying was a Fed had already gotten 4 years in jail for just entering the Capitol. So that was stupid. And then there was a viral video that got like 20,000 likes or so. And they're like, Antifa was in the building, and it's outside the Capitol, and they're looking into an office window, and what do they see? They see an America First flag, AF flag. And what do they assume that is? They assume it's an Antifa flag, and you couldn't fact check that. And so it's just like you just see constant level of stupidity, and this is what rises to the top, because this is what influencers are incentivized to care about, is that they're incentivized to be even dumber to meet their audience, to make more money, and to get more engagement and popularity. And this is what's rewarded. Now, and sometimes you do have interesting topics talking about. Elon Musk was talking about the color of crime. Elon Musk has, talked about what's going on in South Africa, and the farm murders, and it's like technically white genocide. He's talked about what's going on in Ireland, and all these things. And a lot of these stories that are important that should get out there are now helped by social media, but it also comes with an incredible level of idiocy at the same time. And it really encourages and spreads the most noxious development within the right, is the insane clown party. And to a lot of normal people who are not as plugged into this stuff, we do resemble just like a total clown show that is focused on the most ridiculous stuff, doesn't answer normal people's problems, and then we wonder why we're not winning elections. And then, you go on Twitter, and it's because the UFO demons have, hijacked people's minds or something. I don't know. That would be, if I tweeted out that'd be like 15,000 likes, and it's like, this is brilliant analysis. Far more brilliant analysis than what I'm giving right now. So I just think it's like become very low IQ, lowest common denominator, and just complete emphasis on entertainment rather than changing the world. And that's, I think that's something very detrimental to our goals and what we want to accomplish. So that's just like a fear that I've seen with that's been developed thanks to Elon Twitter, is that we do see, our views are becoming more popular at the same time that the right itself has become really stupid. And, you take a step back and maybe a step backward, a step forward at this time. So I don't know. I hopefully... So we're benefiting from Elon Twitter, and a lot of this stuff was pre-Elon Twitter. This stuff has been around for years and years. You could trace this back to the Tea Party, but even the stuff that we, I talk about this with a lot of friends. When we look back at the alt-right, the alt-right in early 2010s, we were like mocking conservatives for how stupid they are, how easily scammed they are, and all this stuff. And now you're seeing a lot of these dissident right talking points adopted by these people, and a lot of our views are that. But at the same time, it's far more dumb. It's far dumber, far dumber, and far more scammy than it was even in the early 2010s when the alt-right was heavily critical of the conservative movement. But now some of, I don't really want to say dissident right people are entirely tied to this, but a lot of associated elements and a lot of people adopting this stuff are fully into the insane clown party. And maybe it's not what we want our ideas to be associated with, because, the alt-right at that time, we were trying to win over, intelligent, young, at that time have been millennials. Now we're old. Now millennials are old. You could even say that millennials are middle-aged. Still a lot of millennials under 30, but, not as much as there were in 2015. But that's now millennials are very different now. But at that time, we were trying to win over young, smart people, mostly middle-class background. And that's who we were trying to win over. And I think now when you see the right, it's very hard to win over, those types that we were trying to win over, young, bookish, intelligent, ambitious, middle-class background. And then they come and associate with the insane clown party. And they say the leaders of like Lauren Boebert and George Santos. That's another insane clown party moment, is how George Santos, who's a gay Hispanic con artist, became one of the most popular figures for the right. He's like a conservative icon. It's like, can we not be win over? But like being a scam artist and a minority scam artist, I don't know if being gay is a good trait to have with the current right, but being a minority scam artist is, perfect for the right. They're like, please take away our money, please pilfer us. We love this as long as we feel like we're owning the libs. But yeah, so there are elements of that. I think this is a larger theme that is definitely going to develop in 2024. Is that the identity issues that we care about, the identitarianism is more talked about than ever before. At the same time, that the right is dumber than ever before. And there is conflict between that and what we want to focus on, because it does hurt us to get our views out there if we're like, okay, anti-white racism is real, great replacement is a big problem, and you have major candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy saying it's not a conspiracy theory, it's the platform of the Democratic Party, was a huge moment. And you see people sharing, criticizing the ADL, criticizing Israeli influence over American foreign policy and all this good stuff that's happening. But it's coming at the same time that we're associated with people who believe in weather machines and, that I guess they're controlled by the UFO demons, and Damar Hamlin and all these people are getting replaced by clones and stuff. And it's like, you're not attracting smart people to this. You're attracting old idiots who want to be scammed and lied to. So that's just something to consider. Now, the last big moment for the right, and there's been moments that I guess I could talk about more, but like Tucker Carlson getting fired, which I don't know if that's had as big of an impact. It's hard to see how that impact has been made. I think it may have impact on how Republicans view the Israeli conflict. Is that I know a lot of people have criticized Tucker for a variety of reasons, but Tucker, when it comes to Israel, he's far more non-interventionist and far less of a supporter than the average conservative. And he would have spread these views through Fox News. And we see a lot of content on Israel when on the online, right? A lot of criticism, let's focus on America. Let's focus on our problems. Let's not, act like Israel is a part of America. Let's not act like Israel, is more important than America, which is a lot of conservatives who are important say. But that, and you've seen other influencers, make some criticisms that are important, like Matt Walsh and Charlie Kirk and a few others who have done this, and Vivek Ramaswamy as well. But at the same time, it's hard to gauge how important it is. And polling shows that most Republicans still have the same, overwhelming support for Israel for whatever reason among Republicans. And there are no Republican politicians, unless you count Vivek as a Republican politician, and Thomas Massey, who are really criticizing Israel, who are reflecting the discourse on the internet, right? Because if you look at Congress, they're 100% lockstep behind Tel Aviv and Bibi Netanyahu. While on the online right, you would think that there would be a lot more Republicans doing this, but there's no elected officials doing this. There's no candidates that are making this a major issue. So it's not being, and talk radio and Fox News are obviously not reflecting this. So I think maybe if Tucker was still on Fox News, that would have that viewpoint would being aired more and being found more apparent in talk radio and in terms of the real world right, and that being found there. But it's very apparent in the online right. It's just that we haven't really seen it translate into polling among Republicans and Republican politicians adopting these viewpoints. So that could be a change with Tucker, but it still hasn't been seen. I think it's more how Tucker at the beginning of the year was the most important voice in conservative media and most influential voice, and now he's definitely not. And that's why all these people are now attacking him, like Ben Shapiro, all these DeSantis supporters, even people whose career he made, like Pedro Gonzalez. Like Pedro Gonzalez would be a total nobody without Tucker, and Pedro has been attacking him, and so have many other people have turned on him. And that's just a sign that they don't really feel like they have to kiss up to him anymore, because he's no longer on Fox News. He's just like another guy on the internet with his own show. There's many people like that, like including Scott M. Greer. But that is just something to keep in mind when you're looking at changes. But outside of that, I think that was a big moment, but it's hard to gauge how big of a moment, because most of the stuff that we were worried about that Tucker had introduced, that's still very apparent, and that's mostly due to Elon Twitter. And I do think that you could say that Tucker maybe controlled or directed what the right would focus on more when he had the Fox News thing, and maybe it would have been better to focus on stuff that was less stupid. But he himself now engages in some of the stupid stuff. Most of the time, he's still very good. He's talking foreign policy and immigration identity issues. I still think he's mostly good. I just think that some of the stuff rabbit holes he goes down maybe isn't the most productive use of what he should do. But I'm ultimately very positive. I like that he's calling out Ben Shapiro for not caring about America and caring more about Israel and stuff. So I would say he's mostly positive force. He's just not as influential as he was at the beginning of 2023, thanks to being fired. But the real important thing along the right was the Bud Light boycott. It's diminished in its importance or how much people care about it over time, but in the spring and summer, it was the most important issue to conservatives. Bud Light was about to threaten our civilization and take away all our freedoms and liberties and everything we valued, but thankfully, we boycotted Bud Light and we hit back against Bud Light. I was always mocked at a lot of it because I think about the importance of it. When it originally happened, I was wrong. I thought that the boycott wouldn't work because, conservatives have threatened to boycott everything before, and it has rarely worked. I mean, I pointed out the NFL comparison where, all these conservatives we're going to boycott the NFL. And at first it worked in 2017 over the national anthem protests. And then for some reason in 2021 and 2022, conservatives returned to the NFL and were the most fanatical supporters of it and defenders of it. Because, when I originally had the Greer pledge of I will not watch the NFL, this drew a incredible level of outrage from people on the right who felt that the most important thing that they could do is watch the NFL. This is apparently what the globalists don't want to do. And the NFL got even woker, and conservatives returned and were its most ardent defenders. So I thought this might be the case with Bud Light. But Bud Light, actually, they did, mainly due to there's other consumer choices if you want to drink beer. And they turned, Bud Light really got hurt in its market value. It was dethroned as the most popular beer in America. And, it's likely permanent reputational damage. They've been trying to repair it. They've won Kid Rock back, who is boycotting it. They've got Dana White in the UFC promoting Bud Light. They've got Peyton Manning, who's a lot of conservatives like. He's a very popular, former quarterback, very popular sports commentator. He's now doing advertisements for Bud Light. Travis Kelce is also doing it. I don't know if that's the best way to win over conservatives, but he is a popular NFL player, so they could maybe get some people back. And they're trying to win back that bro demographic. So it turned out to be one of the few victories that conservatives had, cultural victories that they've had, and people expected it as this is a major turn in American history. The one notable thing I think that was positive about it is that it did tone down some of the Pride Month stuff. I mean, of course, all these corporations still celebrating Pride Month, but they realize that they can't be too excessive about it. And having satanic trans clothing for kids was a bit too far, and they really didn't want to highlight that they're doing Pride Month as much as they were before because they were worried about getting Bud Lighted. And so there was fears over it going full Bud Light. But the intense focus of it over the years, and I mean, there were people like, Trump is not good on the Bud Light question. And it's the Bud Light question is the most important thing ever. I had people who were telling me that Bud Light is more important than the border. I had people telling me that Bud Light is more important than Trump's. I had several people who, DeSantis supporters saying that the Bud Light and its actions is far more important than Trump's indictments, which is just an insane statement. But based on conservative media and what they were most upset about, it was Bud Light thing. So I think it was a success, but the amount of attention towards it and the level of importance of it was not aligned with what it was in reality. But it did show that there was this emerging conservative consumer market where, not only was the Bud Light boycott important, they were also helping other things to succeed. They helped the Sound of Freedom movie become a box office success. This is a small independent movie made by a Christian company, and it became a huge success because it won over conservatives, and they decided to make it a box office hit. Big news that was going to do, and now you're probably going to see maybe not Hollywood, but other filmmakers do similar movies to appeal to that market. So that's showing it. And then the success of Jason Aldean's Try That in a Small Town, which appealed to conservatives, had a very strong right-wing message. And it went number one on Billboard charts. That was a huge hit. That was a big sign of the conservative consumer market is a big thing. Then the Richmond, North of Richmond, which I think now most people acknowledge was cringe. It was an okay song, but the hoopla around it was outrageous, and people were like, "This shows that the whole country is turning against libs," which was not evidenced in the 2023 elections, but whatever. And that song was a hit due to first winning over conservatives. But then the guy who made Oliver Anthony decided that, he didn't like having a conservative fan base, and he tried to piss them off as much as possible. Most likely going to be a one-hit wonder. But, that still showed the power of the conservative consumer market, consumer demographic. And so there's the emergence of it. And you're going to see more cultural products cater to them. And, there's all been these like Let's Go Brandon raps and other things that have gotten big on iTunes and other things. There is a market there to cater your products to, and there are people to buy it. And as I argued in an article I wrote earlier this year, it is something that maybe conservatives will focus on when they don't feel like they can have real political victories. They will then settle for what happens in the Bud Light boycott or the success of Sound of Freedom, and then they can feel that they're in control of something, while they can't be in control of elections and what happens from a political sphere. And that may be a take that is, and a development that is further exacerbated in the upcoming year, especially with what may happen in the November election. So there's pluses and minuses with it. I still think that the Bud Light boycott and the intense focus on it and things going full Bud Light was a little ridiculous, but they did actually have results for it. I was proven wrong and I was basing these predictions on what had happened before, but in this case it actually worked. So hats off to the conservatives, but I don't think it was quite the grand victory that maybe they took, and we'll have to see the long-term effects of it, but it does show the emergence of a conservative consumer demographic. So those are the issues there. Going with what the biggest things happening in this country are, I think one is the border, or the most important thing is the border. What is happening there is just is totally insane. This month there was over 300,000 illegals encountered, and also you have to keep in mind these are just the ones they caught and apprehended. There's like at least another 50,000, probably more now, that they didn't catch. And these are not counting the ones that they're granting legal pathways to. There's about 75,000 would-be illegals they're allowing in every month through legal means, whether it's through the parole program, which they offer 30,000 migrants per month from 4 different countries, which are Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Haiti. A few other countries get some similar type of program of parole. And then there's the ones who apply for asylum through the CBP1 app, and that welcomes in, I think, 30 to 40,000 migrants as well. So there's roughly, I think, 75,000 would-be illegals are being let in. So you're really having over 400,000 migrants being let into this country, and they don't have any fear of deportation. They're effectively legal migrants because we give them a court date and we tell them you're not going to be deported unless you rape and murder someone. And even there, it might be, it might not happen. So that's what's happening with these migrants. So they're effectively legal migrants. And what we're now seeing with the border crisis is that the distinction between legal and illegal immigration is almost no longer there. It's just immigration. This is what happens. You're more like the guest workers who come here legally are less likely to stay than permanently than the illegal immigrants who are coming here. And there's far more illegal immigrants coming here than guest workers. And the illegal immigrants are just coming to take welfare and become a drain on city resources. And this is just a major, major problem, not even just from the demographics angle, because, there has been, I think every year there's been about 2 million migrants who've come under Biden. Maybe it wasn't in 2021, but definitely in 2022 and 2023. So you really have 7 million migrants illegal. Those are the apprehensions. And then you probably have another 3 to 5 million migrants that came here through legal means we never caught who came over the border. And that's just like so you could have, say, 10 million new foreigners have come here since Biden took office. And that's just, that's astronomical numbers. That's at least 3% of the population that we've just added to our country. So that's the most important thing to happen to our country, and it's getting worse unless something happens. I mean, we're going to have at least 200,000 coming every month, if not 300,000 coming every month. Once again, that's the ones we apprehend. More are coming through other means, or we're not catching. And I think we can get rid of a lot of these migrants, push them out of the country, because they're not coming for jobs. They're literally coming for this, the welfare and the state subsidies. And that's what's happening to all these cities. I mean, these cities can no longer afford this stuff. And they're having a massive crisis dealing with these migrants from New York City, D.C., L.A., Chicago, Boston. They can't really handle this. These sanctuary cities can no longer handle this flow of migrants. Whether that's going to mean Congress does something, that remains to be determined. I mean, it would really help Democrats if they passed a strong bill to curtail it. And I think if there were, expedited deportations, more border security, and these, restrictions on asylum, this would draw down the numbers to under 150,000, which that would still be a lot. That would be more than under Trump. But it would get it off the front page, news. It would also maybe alleviate some of the burden of these sanctuary cities, and it would undermine the potence of it in the upcoming elections. So, but I don't know if Democrats are going to do that. I think they're just too committed to open borders to actually want to do this. They're too committed to their ethnic lobbies that don't want to have this happen. So that's the most important issue that is happening. But I think if Trump came to office, I think a lot of these migrants who came under Biden would self-deport. Because, I mean, all you would have to do is have some really big showy deportations, mass roundups. And once these migrants realize that the handouts are not happening and they do risk deportation, they would go back home. And so I'm not entirely black-pilled by it, because I think, this could help Republicans get in office, and we could easily push these people back to where they came from with just smart policies that Trump promises to bring if he becomes president. So, but if nothing happens to them, and maybe if Biden gets another term, this is a big problem for our country. Permanently transforms our country if they're allowed to stay and if more come. So this is far more important than Bud Light, but Bud Light, of course, got more attention than this. The other second important thing I want to discuss is, anti-white racism is becoming more apparent in our society with the racial quotas that companies have, even though they may not be stated. There's news saying that, the wealthiest corporations in America, only 6% of their new hires were white men. That was a huge problem. But the real issue that's a real issue too, but I think a really disturbing thing that's happening is how juries can no longer convict black criminals or black murderers or black assailants for attacks that they do against non-blacks. It's not just whites, because this has also happened against Asians, where they had a black defendant who was on trial. All the evidence pointed that this is the guy who did it, and a jury couldn't convict them, or they couldn't agree to a sentencing. Now, there's been some really egregious examples of this year. The one is this Asian case from Delaware, where there was this black guy who broke into a jewelry store, he stole some stuff, and he beat the crap out of the Asian store owner. And the guy was caught on video. They caught him with the jewelry. They had this guy dead to rights. The victim had identified him, everything. And they couldn't get a conviction. And then, it was really funny when they interviewed the people afterwards, like, nonchalant. It's like, yeah, we really had it all out there, but, we just couldn't get a conviction. It was like, a team losing a game. It's like, we almost got enough points, but we just didn't get it enough. But it's like, you had literally every evidence possible to convict this guy, and they couldn't get him. They couldn't get this guy. The assailant was a repeat offender, Calvin Ushery Jr. Couldn't find it. Couldn't get a case. Couldn't get a conviction here, and it's no mystery why they couldn't get a conviction, because it's a black guy attacking a non-black person, and they didn't want to convict him. Well, there's several other ridiculous cases. One of the most outrageous was this case from California, this is a 2017 murder where these two black kids had shot and killed an elderly white guy in a robbery, and it was caught on film. The assailants admitted to the crime, but they couldn't convict him on the serious charges relating to the death, is because their defense attorneys claimed that they were suffering from a sickle cell crisis and they had a low IQ and drug withdrawals, and they're just not responsible for this. And this worked on the jurors, that they couldn't agree to these two people who had admitted to murder, caught on tape. There's no indication they were not responsible for it, but due to the fact that they're black, they were able to get away with it. Ethan Liming's beating death, which they had a trial for two of the assailants this year. One assailant was able to plead down to a pathetic charge where he barely served any time in jail. Now, two of the defendants, they brought him to trial, and they only convicted him of the lesser charges. They didn't find them. A jury didn't convict them of the serious charges. The most serious charges of, violent assault, is almost like type disorderly conduct type stuff that they found him guilty for. And even the prosecutors had dropped the murder charges because they felt that it was just a fight that happened, and Ethan Liming accidentally died. So that was what they tried to argue, and apparently the defense was able to utilize that argument in court. The fact that Ethan Liming's friends had used a water gun against these guys gave them authorization to murder a white kid. And the 2017 case that was just ruled this year, that was from San Francisco, in case I didn't make that clear. Then there was this case of Lazarius Harper, who killed Kevin Kirk, who was a father driving home after getting pizza for his family in Houston. I think this occurred in 2022 or 2021, and they just had the trial this month. Conviction. And now Mr. Lazarius Harper was convicted of manslaughter. The family was wanting murder, but the jury only agreed to manslaughter. But this guy was clearly guilty of murder. He and his friends, hounded and chased Kevin Kirk in his car in ATVs, and they shot him, and he shot him in cold blood. Clearly a murder. No reason for this, but they only pared it down to manslaughter. And a jury couldn't reach a verdict on a sentencing, and the jury was likely trying to push for probation for manslaughter, for a cold-blooded murder of a family man who was just driving home for pizza, and he had the unforgivable offense of upsetting these black kids on an ATVs. Well, they're not kids; they're adults. I think the Lazarius is in his 20s. And they couldn't convict him. They couldn't get the jury deadlocked on sentencing, and they had to get a new jury pool. Now, the family was thankful because they were worried the jury was going to bring back probation for manslaughter, and and that's what the defense attorneys were pushing for. And their defense attorneys were trying to blame Kevin Kirk for his own death, and apparently this worked on a number of the jurors. So this is a very disturbing trend if you are murdered in a certain area by a black man and you're not black yourself, there may be a tough time to get that person convicted. We have a few other cases that are coming up where there were prominent cases. There was that left-wing activist who stabbed to death in New York. There's a chance that kid gets off. The leftists around that guy may help his defense, so that's something different. But then there's this really brutal case in Baltimore where this really extremely violent criminal beat and had brutally murdered this businesswoman, this up and coming young businesswoman who is a lib who supported Black Lives Matter, and really hurting the city's reputation. But there is a chance that they might not get a guilty verdict because a jury might not want to send a black man to jail over this. So there's very much. We're going to see more of these cases, and it's very, very disturbing. I think it does jeopardize how American justice is. And, you always worry about putting criminal cases in the hands of judges, but I think in the future, due to the decline in human capital and how we can't trust a jury of your fellow citizens to rule on these cases, that you would rather have judge, for criminal cases, I think you would rather have a trial by judge rather than trial by jury. I think if someone's plainly guilty, a judge would say you're clearly guilty, and they would not be influenced. Even if they're black, they would know that they can't favor black criminals that much like a jury can. They would be more likely to incline to do that. And so that's just something, and even in some of these self-defense cases, you might have a better chance with a judge, like with Rittenhouse. If it was trial by judge for Rittenhouse, the judge would have immediately ruled in favor of Rittenhouse. There wouldn't have even been a question. But with a jury, the fact that, Americans aren't what they used to be, you really can't trust your fellow citizens anymore. You might as well put this in the hands of judges. That might be what we need to have take place if these cases keep happening. I mean, in a lot of DC, they don't want to charge some of these carjackers because they're young, they're like 13-year-old black teens, and they can't get a jury to convict them. So that's happening in a lot of places, that they choose not to charge these kids because they can't get a jury to convict them. So this is definitely a disturbing trend going on in America, and something that was made more apparent by this year. And I'm not even reading off all the cases. I just read off a few. So that is what's happening. And for predictions going into 2024, what we can look forward to, there's movement stuff on the right, of the particular sphere of the dissident right that we could talk about. But I think I'll leave that for other episodes of what 2024 might be looking like. I'm going to look at the bigger picture of world events that could happen. I think that the Ukraine conflict will reach a negotiation phase. I don't know if we'll reach a deal by the end of the year, but I think they're going to start negotiations. It may take some time. We may have a deal by the end of the year. I think if Trump wins, I think Ukraine will just cut a deal. They don't want to. They're before Trump takes office. And the Biden administration is pushing Zelensky to start making a deal. So I think that conflict is going to be whittled down or in the end phase by the end of the year. Israel-Palestine, I think that conflict's probably going to end even sooner than Ukraine. I think Israel will declare a successful military operation or whatever if they get their hostages back, and I don't know, it'll probably be back to normal for them. I don't know what they're going to do with all these Gazans. Nobody wants them. For two reasons. Both the left and the right don't want them, because the left feels that if by accepting them that they've countenanced Israel's ethnic cleansing, and the right doesn't want them they don't want Palestinians in their country. So I don't know that is one of the interesting things that will happen. That will be a major political issue of what happens with the Gazans and where they will go after the war. But I think that will end soon enough. Other issues, I don't know if I want to make a bold prediction on Trump getting convicted, but I am now leaning to that there's a more than a 50% chance that Trump is not convicted in this year, because it looks like all his cases are going to be delayed. One, his Georgia case, the black attorney general is already saying that case is not going to happen before the election. The documents case in Florida, the judge is giving all indications that she's going to delay it after the election, especially if he's the nominee, which he's going to be the nominee. The real question is the J6 DC case. Libs are fighting tooth and nail to ensure that happens before the election. But I think Trump's legal team is finding ways to delay it. It's unlikely to happen in March 4th date that it's set for. It still could happen before before the convention, but I think it's looking very good that he will get his trials delayed, his court cases delayed, which will help in the election. I think if he is not convicted in 2024, there is a more than a 50% chance he will win the election. So that is major white pill I want to deliver. And those are big, important things that I want to say on world events. I think a lot of the things I described are going to be are just going to be more apparent. I think we're going to see more evidence of the conservative consumer demographic exerting its will. I think we're going to see a lot more stupidity from the right. I also think that there's going to be more conversation started on the identity issues and the stuff that the dissident right cares about this year. It will be interesting to see who are new and emerging voices on the mainstream right and conservatism. I think that Daily Wire is going to have even more influence over the right, which is not a good thing. Some people are decent. Matt Walsh is better than Ben Shapiro, but taken together, I don't know if Daily Wire is very good. Candace Owens is still a Daily Wire person. I don't know if she'll still be with Daily Wire by the end of the year. And these are important things on what could happen with the American right. I think the right is going to do very well in European elections, and that as they were doing in last year's elections, with the exception of Poland. So that's going to be a very positive development. So 2024 is going to be a very crazy year, a year filled with news, a year filled with historic events, and Highly Respected will be there to cover them all. So that is the year in review and a look into the future. And now we have our cognitively questions. I answered a lot of them last Thursday for the unlocked IQ supplement we did. Well, we've got a few more left to answer. And so as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask questions and suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitively option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. So we'll start off with mystery, because I did not answer this question last week because he said it was for the new year, so I wanted to wait till the new year to answer it. And he says, IQ question for the new year: what do you think a second Trump term will mean for restricting legal immigration? I worry that the Vivek Elon types could someday reach a compromise with the establishment in which illegal immigration is completely eliminated, but the great replacement continues at pace as long as it's legal. I think he's going to do a lot on illegal immigration. Through executive action, as he did in his first term. Legal immigration went down under Trump, and it was through executive actions to make it harder to come here legally. They reduced the number of refugee intake. They made it harder to apply for asylum. They put additional restrictions on your likelihood to use welfare and be on state assistance, government assistance. They ensured that those people wouldn't be allowed to immigrate. So it's just things like that, and having the reputation of being, an immigration hawk and hate and being anti-immigrant, that can reduce the numbers. And also bringing back the travel ban, not allowing, a lot of these immigrants from Muslim majority nations to come to the United States. So there's a lot of easy things he can do. I think he will do a lot more of the things that he did in the first term, and I think those numbers will come down. But as I said, there's hard to differentiate legal and illegal immigration now, when these illegal immigrants, by all stated purposes, are legal immigrants. And so really restricting asylum and who's granted asylum and how the asylum process works would significantly reduce immigration across the board, illegal and legal, and those numbers would just come down. So I don't think there might be some push for guest workers or stuff, but I don't even think that can get through Congress. But through executive action, he will reduce legal immigration. And so I'm very optimistic about that. I know some people may they think that Trump never did anything on immigration, but he actually did. And so he has a question on Southern heritage, because he wants to know how we can restore it based on last week's IQ supplement. If we can restore freedom of association, maybe we can restore the statues on private land in some small towns. It's I'll make that my question. How can we best preserve Southern heritage going forward? I think just these laws that the South or Southern states are enacting, saying that banning the toppling of statues and restricting the ability for these cities to do that is the way to go. Because if those are on the books, it's very hard for cities and localities to remove these statues. Virginia had these similar laws protecting statues. And that's why the Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville took forever to take down. And, they couldn't put it back up. It took the Democratic state government to change the laws to allow, Charlottesville to go forward to remove it. But there were these laws on the books that prevented that. And when you have a deep red state like Tennessee and Alabama or Mississippi or South Carolina, it's going to be very tough for these localities to ever take down statues because they would have to get state legislature approval, or a state legislature would say you just can't do that, and that would preserve a lot of those statues going forward. And even with what Florida's doing, a large part the reason why Jacksonville took down these statues in their area, I think it may have just been one statue, is because they're worried about Florida passing a new law to protect historic statues that localities may want to take down, and they try to remove it before that was enacted so they would have the freedom to do that. But that's just the real thing you have to do, is just like through the state legislatures, go through and pass these laws, and it makes it very, very difficult for these states to do these things in a way. Now, if, say, random protesters raise a statue and nobody wants to put the statue up, then that creates a fight there. But that's the best way to preserve it and ensure that we are not toppling every statue that leftists are offended by. So that is my answer to that question. And then K Max sent a question. He said, Scott, with the debate about college versus trade school, do you think part of the anti-school mantra many of the distant right have comes from the idea the left pushes that only dumb or lowly educated whites would support their own group or help them out? He talks about a Jewish person who supports other Jews is never considered dumb or ill-educated, but if any white person rejects the woke mantra, he is considered low-class and a redneck. Is there a way to get more college-educated whites on the conservative side? It seems our side prefers just to drop out rather than join the fight. I've talked about how to get college-educated whites on our conservative side. I'm trying to work on an article on getting youth votes and what the European right answers that. But I think it's that a huge part of our audience is now Gen Xers who are very bitter about the way their life went. And, they're divorced. And so they have all these arguments that they want to have. And they're like, they just want to drop out. And they're, angry about the course of things, which there's perfectly valid reasons to be angry about what's going on. But they're very anti-youth, and they view, boomers were all telling everyone to go to college and then just have a good handshake to get a job. Now, Gen Xers are like, don't go to college, just go to trade school, and then you'll become a millionaire. And it's just as equally bad advice as what boomers were giving. But does it come from the idea that the left pushes that only dumb or lowly educated whites would support their own group or help them out? I don't know if that really has the case. I just think that we have huge base of support. We have bigger base of support among downscale whites, and that a lot of our group is now closer to downscale whites, and there's this deep resentment towards non-downscale whites, I guess, are more striver whites, which there's there are good reasons to be. And a lot of what the right is now, even though a lot of the people who push this stuff are middle class themselves, a lot of what the right pushes now is this type of semi-class war between downscale whites versus upper scale whites or upscale whites. And this is the real fight we need to have, when I don't really think that this is the way to approach it. And there's plenty of problems with downscale whites as there are with upscale whites. I think, with downscale whites, they always say that they're the most likely to be identitarian and have an in-group preference. But I don't know if that's the case, because, downscale whites are having mixed race, families way more than upscale whites. Most of the interracial marriages that are happening are between whites and Hispanics, and very few upscale whites are marrying Hispanics. It's primarily at the blue collar level. It's the downscale level that's happening, and it's the same even with like interracial marriages and children between whites and blacks. That's usually at the downscale level. Whites and Asians, that's more upscale level. But the vast majority of interracial marriages, as the studies show, it's white Hispanic, and that's happening at the lower end. So I don't know if that's a sign that they care more about their in group. I just think it's you really just have to create a type of political ideology and political focus that's appealing to smart people who want to make a positive change in the world. And it's not entirely built around Gen X divorced dad resentment. And how they view life should be. I think you just have to have a more positive vision that is welcoming to people who may have gone to college. And even though many of the people who rail against college and college grads are college educated themselves, a lot of this is just Gen Xers going through a midlife crisis. So you can win over these types of people. You just have to have a type of political aesthetics and political focus that is appealing to smart, young, intelligent. You already used intelligent, but young, intelligent people who think that there's something wrong in the world and that they would like to make a positive change to the world. And I think that that's the real answer to this. But on the bigger scale with GOP, there's probably some deep structural changes that they need to make to win back college educated whites again. I don't know if they will make them sometimes they're increasing their downscale white turnout so much that maybe they feel they don't need to try to win over college educated whites. But we'll see. I mean, the main problem with the GOP is that they're losing college educated whites, and there just needs to be a different way of approaching politics and how they appeal to stuff. And I think the elevation of the ICP, the Insane Clown Party, is really hurting the GOP among college-educated whites. So reducing the stupidity would be my answer to how to win over some of these people. And actually, Mystery has one more question that I just noticed, so I do need to answer that, so I forgot to get to this. He said, can you make any suggestions, book recommendations, anything for how millennials and Zoomers can practically prepare and protect ourselves financially from America's impending gerontocratic socialist hellscape? I don't know if there's any book recommendations for that. A lot of the recommendations people have, I'm really skeptical about. It's like buy crypto and stuff. I don't know. A lot of what crypto is just as tied into the market as some of the other forms. I know some people are going to be appalled by that and outraged, but what we've seen with a lot of the economy is that crypto is just as dependent on these normal things. It's not really the solution to some stuff. I would say buy land. I would say that would be one thing, is like having property. I think that would be a good investment to make money off this and ensure yourself that you're not entirely dependent on this. I think it just depends on how bad it is. And the easiest thing actually to say is just to live in a red state. That's actually my one advice that I would have. I don't know if there's any type of book recommendations I have. I know there's probably some financial planning advice. I think a lot of that is handed out by the right is snake oil and maybe not best listened to, and is more hyped up to hysterical formations that there's going to be an upcoming collapse. I don't think there's going to be a collapse. There's going to be, I think there will be a decline in living standards, but it won't be quite the collapse. But if you want to avoid the collapse or the worst effects of it, I think living in a red state is probably the best advice you have. Now, there's some horrible cities in red states, St. Louis, Memphis, and some others, but you can live in the suburbs to escape some of the terrors of this hellscape. So that is my one practical advice. I'd have to think on that more. I'm sorry I don't have a much better answer, but I do think actually moving to a red state is one of the best options you have. So we're going to go on to some more questions that we have. I think we have two more questions, and this is one from John. He would say, who would you say are some good historians on our side? Or if not our side exactly, maybe our side adjacent, or at least fairly conservative, and don't subscribe to many of the anti-white, anti-American trends that have snowballed in the study of U.S. history in the last decade or so. I think you would just have to go back to older historians. Merton Coulter, who I did a podcast on Reconstruction, is one example. You could say Lothrop Stoddard is a historian. He did get his graduate degree from Harvard in history, so he would count. There's a ton of others. I mean, Francis Parkman, who was a famous 19th century writer, American writer, who wrote about the early colonial days of America and a celebrated volume history that led up to the French and Indian War. He's a great choice to make. But current historians, one conservative would be Stanley Payne, who is a Spanish expert who wrote a lot about Franco and the Spanish Civil War. He is actually a conservative. He's like a paleocon. I think he spoke at a Mencken conference. So that's how pretty right wing he is. he is a good recommendation on history. Paul Gottfried, in that same respect, would be another academic. I don't know if he would. Paul Gottfried's more of a political scientist, but a lot of his stuff covers history. And he is a respected academic. He is, he did have tenure. And yeah, but Stanley Payne would be probably the one example of a strong conservative historian who would be there. Also, the guy who wrote Stalin's War, Sean McMeekin. I don't think he's open about his views, but reading his books, you can definitely tell he's of a right-leaning bent. So those are some of the few examples. I wish I could give you some more examples, but there's not that many out there. You generally have to read mainstream historians who are generally left-wing, like David Hackenfisher, who, even though he's written a lot of great history, especially Albion Seed, he's still very left-wing in some of his biases and very liberal. I mean, he had a new book on our African founders, so that gives you a taste of his bias. But you just have to read some of these people. And some of the left-wingers have some good history that they're like condemning, but for us, it comes with, we would have a different interpretation of whether what they're writing about. So that would be my answer to that. And now we'll conclude with New England Refugee. He's like, hey, Scott, why has the term autism had such a turnaround in pop culture? When I was young, it meant the dumb kid that would freak out when he heard loud noises or liked to crack ice on the ground with his feet for hours. Now it means a highly proficient workaholic that has some poor social skills. Well, any ideas? Well, the first definition of autism also means that. I think it really just means you have poor social skills and you can't, you have these weird habits of continuing making loud noises and you can't read the room. So that still has the meaning, and a lot of people with autism still have those disabilities to function properly in society. I don't know if it's really reached the mainstream, but I think it's just autism that they now view it as just smart people who just can't cope with things. But that's always been the case with smart people. I don't know if people were really on the spectrum. I think that there's maybe more people on the spectrum due to how we learn things now as kids, and it's much more TV time and internet time, and we maybe don't develop proper social skills. So a lot of our habits are a lot weirder, and a lot of the way we interact with people is really strange. But I don't know how it turned around from that. I think there was always that way with autism. I think it's that before, to be labeled autistic, you would have had to have those really those obvious and obnoxious habits, like you can't function in a classroom. And now that we've pared down autism diagnosis to just like a kid with not, smart kid who doesn't have proper social skills, now everybody wants to be autistic. So it's just a change in the time. I don't really know why that was their change, but it's happened. And I don't know if it's, I think it's just a lot of women now want to claim that they have autism because it makes up for them being introverted or something. So some of it's female driven, but that's my best analysis on that. I really can't say much more than that. But that is it for our first highly respected of the new year of 2024. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed it. We're going to have some more great content later this week. We'll have a column, at least one column this week, and a fantastic IQ supplement later on this week. So tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.